Hey everyone, grab your seats. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Who's having fun? I hope everyone is enjoying the 80th birthday party of Alcoholics Anonymous in Australia. My name's Darren, I'm an alcoholic. And we have landed in our speaker meeting. A little bit different from most of the other meetings at this convention. We have two 15-minute speakers and then a 45-minute main speaker. So sit back, relax, loosen up those laughing gear mechanisms and enjoy. I'd like to introduce Jodie W. from Woolwich Beginners. She might be the only chairperson I'll kiss on the way past, my wife, and I'll leave you in her capable hands.
Thanks, Darren D. He's the only one I want to kiss from, so get a room, yeah? Welcome everyone to the speaker meeting of the 2025 Australian National Convention. My name's Jodie and I am an alcoholic. Thank you. I'm also a member of the Woolwich group that meets, Woolwich Beginners, that meets on Sunday afternoon. Good group, isn't it? AA Preamble, Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We're self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation or institution and does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. At this meeting we'll be using a time card system and with a view to having everyone participate at the convention, we're asking people to share the time. This is not the time card system. So Vasuda is our timekeeper today, and she is going to give our speakers a 5-minute warning when it's 5 minutes to go and a 1-minute warning when it's time to wind up. And you all know what your time limits are. For our first speaker, I'm going to ask Tim L. from Hawaii, who happens to be 25 years sober today. Awesome job. That's a quarter of a century, everyone. Yeah.
My name's Timothy Lara and I'm an alcoholic. And my sobriety date's 4/19 of 2000, so today's 25 years. Thank you. I got sober when I was 6 years old. My home group is the Friday Night Young People's Group in Maui, Hawaii. We meet at 7 p.m. in Kihei every Friday night, and I have a sponsor, and I sponsor guys as well. So 25 years ago today, I was in jail. I was 4.5 months into a year-long sentence, and in jail again, I'll say. When I got out of jail, I started my time over just because I wanted to go through and pick up a beginner's chip and a 30-day chip and a 60-day chip. And it wasn't until after I got a year that I went back to my original sobriety date. And I remember when I was in jail and going to meetings, there was a guy named Bob that used to bring the meetings in. And he said, if you want to stay sober, you do two things when you get out of here. You'll go to a meeting the first day and you'll get a sponsor, a temporary sponsor. And so I asked Bob if he would be my sponsor. And when I got out, he would call me and take me to meetings, and eventually he started talking about working the steps. And I was also in a treatment program, so I was like, I'm not really that alcoholic that I need to work the steps in AA and do this treatment program thing that I'm in. So I stopped answering the phone when Bob called. But I'll back up a little bit. The thing that landed me in jail this time was I had a series there after high school where I was getting arrested quite a bit, and I used to go to this particular bar downtown, and we called it Drink to Drown. You paid a cover charge, and it was free well drinks and draft beer all night. And I'd tell the bartender I want half rum and half Coke, and I'd tip him $20, and that's what I would drink. And a couple of drinks in, my bottom lip would start going numb, and I knew I was almost to the point that I wanted to be at. And at that point, I could dance, I could talk to women, like I was just a completely different person. And few more drinks after that, I'd be in the bathroom sticking my finger in my throat, throwing up so that I could drink more. And I didn't realize till I came to Alcoholics Anonymous that that's not how most people drink. It made sense to me, my stomach hurt and I physically couldn't handle any more alcohol, and so I was purging that so that I had more room. And I was at this bar drinking, and I was on house arrest. I had a 5-year suspended prison sentence. I just got out of jail 2 weeks before, and was released in a year-long treatment program in which I was supposed to stay at home and so on and so forth. And I remember when I got out of jail, I was in jail, I think, for about maybe 2 months at that point, and I got out. And I was really worried that I was going to go back out, get arrested, go to prison for 5 years because I had this 5-year suspended prison sentence. And so my thought was I would get out and I would drink a lot and get so sick that I just wouldn't want to drink again. And so that was my solution, right? Because I knew I'd kind of stopped doing drugs up until that point when I went to jail that time, but drinking, I just didn't know how I was going to stop drinking. And I don't know why I thought that would work, because I'd been plenty drunk before, and I throw up just about every time. But that was my solution. And so I did that when I got out, and ended up going to that club that weekend and got kicked out for getting in a fight, and went back the next weekend and got 86 and told never to come back, and went back the next night, and the same cop that was standing outside the night before when I got kicked out grabbed me by the back of my shirt as I walked through the door, and he said, "What don't you understand about never come back?" And I started apologizing. I was raised in a military household, so I knew how to say yes sir, no sir really good. And he asked me if I'd been drinking, and I told him I hadn't been. And the truth is I just finished a 12-pack in the car. And he did a little pencil test, and he's like, "I'm going to let you go. Do you understand what I'm saying? Never come back." And unfortunately, there was a cop that had arrested me a few months earlier for narcotics charges, and he heard my name being ran on the wire and came flying down and asked him what he was holding me for, and he told him trespassing, and he told him to book me. And mind you, I'd just been released from jail 2 weeks earlier, 5-year suspended prison sentence, meaning that I'm already sentenced to go to prison for 5 years if I violate. And at that time, when he shut the cop car door, that axe came swinging down. It was like finally there were some real consequences. I was going to prison for 5 years because I couldn't quit drinking, and that feeling only intensified while I sat in jail that night in the holding cell and could no longer drink alcohol. I was sobering up. But the funny thing is, the next morning when I took a warm shower and put a fresh jumpsuit on, all of that went away. The ego had rebuilt that quick, and I was like, they're not going to send me to prison, and just that quick, I was already back to thinking that this wasn't that big of a deal. And it ended up turning to be a pretty big deal. I stayed in jail for 4.5 weeks, and they finally sentenced me to a year in jail. And as I said, I got sober halfway through that. When I started going to meetings after I got out of jail, I said I was an alcoholic because everybody in the room said they were alcoholic, and I had to get my court card signed at the end of the meeting. But I wasn't an alcoholic. To me, an alcoholic was the guy under the bridge with a brown paper bag in his hand, and I didn't fit that description, And I didn't really know what an alcoholic was, but it wasn't this, And I was willing to go to these meetings because it meant I didn't have to go to prison. And eventually I got a sponsor. I went to this one particular meeting because they had a basketball gym there, and I was on house arrest, so I could only leave a half hour before, and I had a half hour afterwards, so I'd go and shoot hoops at this place. And it was called the In-Depth Big Book Study, and it was an in-depth big book study. They sat down and they read a couple sentences, and then all these old crusty guys would talk about those couple sentences, and then they would read a couple more sentences, and they would look up words in the dictionary and talk about history, and it just wasn't, for a 19-year-old, trying to get sober, wasn't it. And but after that meeting, a guy stuck his hand out as I was trying to leave to go play basketball and introduced himself, and he eventually became my sponsor. And I was probably out of jail about 6 months at that time, and I'd been working the steps with somebody else to the best of their ability, but I hadn't really found any relief. I was still wanting to drink, but knowing that I was going to go to prison if I drank, and still wanting to drink, and just kind of holding on and just trying not to drink. And he said if I wanted him to be my sponsor, we were going to sit down and we were going to read through the big book, and when we came to action, I would take it, and when we came to a question, I would answer it, and that's how we'd work through the steps. And so we did that, and I'm really grateful for that process, because what happened to that process in answering the questions that we came to, there's a part in We Agnostics, I think, that says, if once you start to drink, you have little control of the amount you drink, and once you stop, you can't stay stopped, then you're probably an alcoholic. And that's as close as it comes in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous on telling you that you are or that you're not an alcoholic. And he had me match my experience to that. He says, there ever a time that you started to drink and you didn't have control over the amount that you drank? And I was like, well, sure, whenever I was, and actually, if I'm going to be really honest, it was hard for me to identify that because I didn't really drink like a glass of wine with dinner or beer after a hard day's work. At 18 years old, that just wasn't how I was drinking. I was drinking to get shit-faced. And so I had to think about it. I was like, well, yeah, those times I'd go to that bar and like I would start drinking and physically I couldn't handle any more alcohol. So I'd throw up so I could drink more alcohol. Clearly something was happening in those times beyond, what I was trying to do that made me keep drinking, right? And he was like, was there ever a time that you stopped and you wanted to stay stopped and you couldn't, you picked up again? I was like, sure, 2 days out of jail, going back and drinking at that same, place I got kicked out of the night before, knowing I'm going to prison for 5 years. And he said, do you think that was kind of insane? Was that a little crazy, right? And that unlocked that part of the second step where it says, could remove us from, or restore us to sanity. Because I had a real hard time with that word too, right? Like I'd never been in a straitjacket or padded room. And I didn't consider myself insane. And he helped explain to me that all we were talking about was the insanity of taking the first drink. Knowing what was gonna happen, yet we do it again, right? And the thing is like I always had an excuse. It wasn't the alcohol. I was like, well, you were drinking at that nightclub, so of course that happened. Or, you were out with Juan that night, so that always happens when you go out with Juan. Or, you were drinking tequila, so that's what happens when you drink tequila. But it was never just the drinking, right? And so when I did that though, and I read through the book and he had me match my experience like that, for the first time I said I was an alcoholic and I understood what that meant. And it kind of painted me into a corner because now if I'm an alcoholic and I'm sitting in this room with a group full of people that I can't identify to physically, right? Because again, where I was getting sober, there just nobody really matched my outside. But if they're alcoholic and I'm alcoholic and I hear what they, the depths they went to, because at this time too, I hadn't really, in my mind, hadn't hit a bottom, and my sponsor would remind me that I just got out of jail, spending a year in jail, was in and out of jail. And but that was just kind of normal in my life, so it didn't seem that different. Bill talked about his alcoholic life seemed the only normal one, and that was where I was at, right? And so, but anyways, I kind of painted myself into the corner of being an alcoholic, and then I had the choice of like, I can keep on riding this elevator down or get off here. And so I chose to get off there and accept spiritual help and continue through the rest of the steps as they were laid out. And, it was really important going through the inventory process and the way that it was laid out in the book, who they are, what they did, what it affected in me, and then where I had been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, fearful, what I could have done differently in each situation, right? And in doing so, kind of having that notebook and being able to turn that page and not look at what they did and what it affected me, but just be looking at my part, was a really helpful process for me, clearing out all that stuff that had been blocking me off from a relationship from a higher power. And when I got sober in Florida. I've been in Hawaii for about 23 years now. But some of the old guys would say, just put the plug in the jug, right? And that's, thank you. And just putting the plug in the jug is simple, right? If I didn't have an alcoholic mind, because that's that second part is once we put the plug in the jug and we stop drinking, how do I stay stopped, right? And that's the real challenge, is that I have an alcoholic mind. There's a part in the book where it talks about the type of defense that keeps one from touching a hot stove isn't there when it comes to alcohol. But later in the book, in the 10th step, it says we recoil from alcohol as if it's a hot flame, right? And what they're talking about is that mental obsession. They're talking about that insanity of drinking, that you would be insane to put your hand on a burning hot stove time and time again, right? And not having that defense, but yet later working through these steps and being placed in that position of neutrality, as they say, that to me is the biggest promise, right? We have the promises right before that, the 10th step. But for me, the biggest promise is that I no longer have to go through life fighting not to drink anymore. I no longer have to go through life wanting to drink, know I'm going to go to prison if I drink, yet still wanting to drink, right? And in the beginning, it was a struggle, like going in and paying for gas and seeing the beer in the cooler over there, right? And today, that's not my experience. I have an amazing life today. I'm here with you guys in Australia, celebrating 25 years of sobriety, and before, and I would say that my life is as big and as amazing as my ability to get out of the way and let God continue to run my life. Because when I was running my life, my friend Juan always says, when he came in, his sponsor said, Juan, if you were paying somebody to manage your life and make the decisions for you up to this point, and you just got out of treatment, you're on house arrest, you're gonna go to prison for 5 years, like, would you give that person a raise? Would you say they were doing a good job? And he was like, no. He's like, well, what would you do? He was like, I'd fire them. He was like, then fire them, right? Because I was the one making those decisions up to that point. I was the one leading the charge and making the decisions for my life. And they led me to places like jail, prison, house arrest, treatment, right? Today, when I get out of the way and continue to get out of the way, God continues to lead me places like Antarctica a month ago. You know, I was able to go to the seventh continent and check that off the list, and to Australia, to the 80th National Convention. You know, like it's a pretty good deal, right? And beyond material success, because I've had a little bit of material success in my life as well, which can be a byproduct of being sober. The peace of mind that I have in my life today, which really comes from that relationship with a higher power, is everything for me. You know, I have a couple businesses in the visitor industry in Hawaii, which has been pretty turbulent the last few years. First, we had a pandemic, which shut us down for a little over a year. And then we recently had a pretty massive wildfire on Maui, which again shut us down. In both those situations, I remember I was meeting with my manager and we were doing projections and looking at like, okay, if we stay shut down for a month, what does that look like? 3 months, 4 months. And kind of fearful, you know, because I had 25 employees that depended on me for their paycheck. And I just chuckled, and she like looked at me with like, what? And I was like, God's in charge. Like, we don't have to figure this out, right? And living in that place today, and it's no longer even faith, because they say faith is belief in things unseen, right? And like for me, it's not even unseen anymore. I just know it, right? And there's that part in, I believe it's Indiana Jones, where he had to go across the gulch, right? And he like looks out and it's just this huge ravine. And I don't know if he like threw dust or something happened, but now he could see that there was this bridge there that he could step out on. He kind of like slowly thought about stepping out, and he finally did, and it was solid, right? And that's what it's like. That's what the belief for me today is like. Trusting on God is like, I don't even have to think about it. I just step out and it's there, right? And for me, that's the biggest blessing that I've got from Alcoholics Anonymous, is just knowing that I don't have to be in charge. My life will continue to be as big and amazing as my ability to get out of the way and let God continue to lead it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tim. For our next speaker, can we hear from Nicole S. from Vaucluse?
Hi everybody, my name's Nicole and I'm an alcoholic, and it's lovely to be here. I want to thank the committee for asking me to come and share, but I want to thank them for putting this on and participating in their recovery so I get to participate in mine. And I've worked on committees. My first sponsor, that one there, she was a service queen, and she taught me a lot. And I know what it is to be so committed to something like this and passionate and give your time, but I also know what it is like to be here right now and look around and feel so proud of what you've all done. So thank you for that. I've got to say, I thought I was going to have about 30 minutes to obsess about myself outside between meetings, but God gave me 5. That's either a good thing or a bad thing. We're yet to see. But it is really lovely to be here, and thank you so much for warming up the stage for me, and happy birthday. That's amazing. My sobriety date is the 29th of March 2001, so I recently turned 24 years sober, despite my very best efforts. Thank you. I do love a birthday. I'm so glad in AA we get 2. I recently turned 62, and I didn't think I'd be happy about being 60, but you know what? It's actually okay. It's actually okay. But being 24, it's just a privilege both ways. I have a sponsor, and you know, the best thing about that is that she knows that she's my sponsor. There are probably people in this room that would be really surprised, because there were times when I probably said they were my sponsor and they had no idea, no idea at all. And the worst sponsor I've ever had is the one I gave myself, and I was my own sponsor for a while there too. So I have not done this program perfectly. The only thing that I have done that's anywhere near perfect is, no matter what's happened, bizarrely, I haven't picked up a drink. I don't know how that's happened. Well, I do, God arrived. But that's been it. My recovery journey has been, life on life's terms, and lots of tussles in there as well. But, I always we've got 15 minutes. I like to sort of stand in front of you and make sure that you all know that you've got a real alcoholic who's got a bit of a solution, you know. Everything that I'm about to speak about or have spoken about or ever speak about in AA is what I've learned in the rooms of AA. When I arrived here, I knew nothing. I thought I knew it all, but I actually knew nothing. And so when I picked up a drink, I drank like a drunk from the get-go. And that's not because I had drunks around me. Shake my family tree, they're everywhere, but it didn't matter. I drank like a drunk, you know. And I was never interested in that kind of third drink feel, you know, the one where you're feeling good and you kind of think you can dance like Madonna and you look like Elle Macpherson. I wasn't interested in that. I mean, if I stumbled into that third drink feel, I was in the sixth drink really quickly. I wanted to reach oblivion. Alcohol was always a tool for me, but I didn't know I needed it. I had no clue. I just knew that I never felt right wherever I was. You know, my sponsor is Sharon F. now. She recently got married in Maui last year, actually. She's in LA, her group is the Pacific Group. She talks about lying in the cotton fields of Iowa when she was a kid, waiting for the spaceship to come and pick her up, right? I really relate in that. I'm in the back seat of my parents' car in Canberra, and not quite as romantic as cotton fields in Iowa, but anyway, and they're taking me somewhere, and I'm fantasizing that they're taking me back to my real family. Now, I'm not in a family of 10 kids where I'm not seen or ignored. No, it's just me, mum and dad. That's it, 3 of us, and I'm not fitting in. And I didn't fit in at school either. I didn't know I wasn't fitting in. I just didn't feel right wherever I was. And you gave me a drink when I'm 16 years old, and I'm at the Gladesville pub. I'm seeing a band called Jimmy and the Boys, and I am gone. I'm vomiting around the corner. I've drunk too hard, too fast, and too much. And I never once in 21 years of my drinking questioned that until the very, very end. Until the very end. My drinking was one of blackouts, you know, real blackouts. Blackouts like, I loved hearing the old timers meetings today, and I love those. I never had a blackout that took me from, you know, Sydney to Melbourne. Suddenly I'm in Melbourne, you know. But I love hearing people, especially the old timers, and I love thinking, oh, I'd drink with him. I would have drunk with Brewery Bill, right? I wanted to wake up in a house full of dwarves. Like, that's the kind of drinking that sort of excited me. But that was my drinking. So I didn't, you know, often I wouldn't have even known that I went out, except that maybe there was a stamp on my wrist, you know. I would wake up and I'd have these little checklists, you know, is there a stamp on my wrist? There is. So I went out somewhere. I'd look up, was it my ceiling, you know, tick. I'd look to the left, is there anybody in my bed? Because at some stage in my drinking, I started not caring who I went home with. Not caring, it didn't matter. And I ended up on a jail cell for no other reason in the middle of a week that's because I decided to drink and drive again, you know? And I drove in blackout too. I heard Father Tom from America say that I was willing to kill. And I was willing to kill. I drove in blackouts, not once a week, 2-3 times a week. It didn't matter, I didn't care. And that's what drinking gave for me. So when I came into AA, I crawled in from a consequence of sitting in a jail cell. And I got home after that night, and I woke up, I went to sleep for a couple of hours, and I woke up and I had this moment of clarity. But I think about that moment of clarity. I think what I had was a moment of honesty. You know, just this moment of honesty that I can't drink. And Bede from Randwick used to say many things, but one of the things I really loved was he used to say, listen to the what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. Listen to the what happened bit. And I love the what happened, and we heard it in the old times meeting today for 2 hours. We heard the what happened time and time and time again. It's kind of where we get touched by God before we even know God exists. And for me, my what happened is 12 years long, and I don't have 12 years to tell you that, but it really is. 12 years before I got sober, I went into AA meetings because my friends were getting clean and sober because they really needed to. And I went along to help them, you know, push them through the doors. And I sat in the meetings, and I did them all. I did Naranon, Al-Anon, I did NA, I did AA. I didn't quite like the way Al-Anon spoke about the alcoholics. I didn't get that I was identifying there either. But I listened to your stories, and I was bored by them. I thought they were beige. I thought I had better stories, and I had no idea idea I was identifying. And I walked out for another 12 years. But what happened for me when I finally had that little moment of honesty, I knew that there was someone I could ring. I knew that there was someone I could ring. And the most important part of my what happened story is when I rang her and I asked that question, are you still going to those meetings? She said yes. She said yes. Because if she had said no, I stopped believing in God, or I didn't like the chapter to the wives, or, you know, whatever the other things that take us out the doors, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here. I'd be dead in the water without a doubt. And she had seen me 2 years before, and I turned up and I'd had a huge blackout the night before, and I was turning up places telling people I had to go immediately, you know, and she watched me waddle away and she said, I think she's going to die and I don't know how to help her. The way she helped me, that she stayed in AA. So when I finally made that call, she was able to take me to a meeting. And I was 36 years of age, and I thought I was really old. I wasn't. But life happened to me really quickly. Jodie was my first sponsor, and she took me through the book and through the 12 steps. I remember doing my first step, and it was a big writing one, and we sat in a park and I had to read it out to her. I was convinced with 12 pages of my story that she was going to say to me, I don't think you need to be in AA. She didn't. I think she actually paused and went, I'm really glad you're with us, which was quite right. But I did the steps and I looked at my stuff and I did a fourth as best to my ability, and I made amends where I could. My amends were pretty strange. I'd go in with one thing, but because I was a blackout drinker, I had most people say, okay, well, there was that, and then they reeled off a lot of other things that happened, which I had not forgotten. But by that stage, I was really willing to do this, but I got a really big, gifted life really fast. You know, by the time I'm sort of 3 years sober, I'm pregnant. By the time I'm 4, I've got my baby, and then before I'm 5, I'm a single mum. And then I meet someone and he's got 2 burgeoning teenagers, and then his sister died and I get a little 8-year-old who doesn't have a parent, and I'm starting to say, I've got this, God, because that's what happens when we get busy. We get this, you know. I was 16 years sober when I figured out that self-reliance was a character defect, right? A character defect. No, I want to bottle mine, sell it and make a lot of money. I've learned that I think the character defects that are the hardest to let go of are the ones that saved us once. And self-reliance saved me once, but I'm back in it. I'm being sponsored by people who don't know they're sponsoring me. I'm sponsoring myself. I'm trying to sponsor other people. I'm getting to one meeting every now and then. And once a week, and then once a fortnight, and then once a month. And every time I got to a meeting, they'd be so pleased to see me that they'd ask me to share, and I'd always say, I'm back. I'll be back. I'm going to go to a meeting tomorrow. And somewhere between getting home from that meeting and getting to bed, that idea would go on because my life was so busy. And so I'm 16 years sober, and I'm at the first round up here, and I'm on my knees in pain, the worse than what it was 16 years before, because I've got a heart full of AA and a head full of Nicole. And I find my sponsor, and she readjusts my sails. She readjusts my sails, and I start facing God again. I believe that we're facing in one or other the direction in AA. We're either facing God or we're facing away from God. And I start to face away from God when my program gets into deficit. You know, I don't ring my sponsor. I forget to pray. I don't do this. I don't get to my home group. Whatever's happening, I'm just suddenly to swing away from God, and I don't even know I'm doing it. So she swings me back. And I start having a really amazing life, you know, what it is really to work with other alcoholics, and God keeps me really busy in that area. One of the things that really struck me about this morning's, I've got a girl crush on Lillian Roth. Anybody else? Gee, wow, that was amazing hearing about that. But going through all of that, that was a big what happened. In the what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now of AA's history, that whole play was like, what happened? Yeah. And then we had the old timers doing that too, but that whole idea of legacy is really, really, really powerful to me at the moment. And my daughter moved out from me in those dry years when I was sponsoring myself, and she moved out and went back to her dad's, which was pretty horrific. She came back to me at around 16 years sober, and I watched her drink. And I watched her drink and drink and drug and drink, and I didn't know what to do, and I went to Al-Anon and I went to God. Oh my God, I went to God. And On the 21st of May this year, she's going to be 21 years old. And on the 23rd of May this year, she will be 2 years sober. Yeah, I know, she's not here, but I bring it up every time. And I do that because the other thing that Bede used to say, right, Jode, was the next best thing to your own recovery is watching someone else. And we get to do that here in AA. We get to see God in other people before we see God in ourselves. And by watching my daughter get sober and knowing that the reason why she could was somebody picked her up, a running mate of mine, because she didn't want me anywhere near, and in fact, God got me out of the city. But she went to meetings with Stu, and I knew that she was walking into meetings where there were going to be people who were going to hold her. I knew that you guys were all going to be there. And Bill Wilson does a talk, and I talk about this a lot, but Bill Wilson does a talk in 1965 where he talks about the importance of the legacy of AA. What we heard today, this morning, how important it is that we keep turning up and we open the doors, we put the seats out, we do the hot coffee and make sure there's tea and coffee and biscuits and pies, because there's a baby born in 1965 that might need us one day. That was me. I was born in 1965. When I'm 19, my dad's saying to me, maybe you're one of these people that can't drink. He was right. I didn't think he was. But I was born in 1965. So in 2004, my daughter's born. And in 2023, she needed AA, and you were all there for her. Thank you. So it's 2025, and babies have been born this year. And some of them are going to need us. They're going to need us in 20 years' time, or 18 years' time, or 30 years' time. And the importance of us holding together, holding each other tight, walking shoulder to shoulder, lifting each other up, and keeping those doors open is just so incredibly powerful and important. So I am eternally grateful. I'm eternally grateful for all of those who have come before me and for all of those who are going to come, thank you, after me. I'm really pleased my sponsor gave me a book a little while ago, and it's not AA literature, and I apologise for that. And it's a book called The Holy Man. Some people might have read it. I'd never come across it before, and I think you can get your own story from it. But for me, what I get, and what I get given from AA, is that everybody that stands in front of me is a holy man, right? Everybody. Because what that means for me is that I get an opportunity to draw closer to God. No matter what you do or say or how you act in front of me, what I get to do is I get to draw closer to God by finding grace, dignity, compassion. My sponsor talks about when we drink, we slide that stuff over the bar. We slide our dignity over the bar. We slide our grace, our ethics, our morals over the bar. And what AA gives us, a mirror and a map, we get to get all of those things back. And we get to see it in each other before we see it in ourselves. And I'm so eternally grateful for you showing me how to do that. And thank you very much for asking me to share today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And for our final 45-minute speaker, can we hear from John C. from the Tarot Young at Heart group? Thanks so much.
If you think these are notes, they're not. They're prayers, because I'm nervous. My name's John, I'm an alcoholic. I got sober at the age of 26, and I'll be 51 years in June. Just before we kick off, just to make people think a little bit, a lot of newcomers ask about, what about sex? So, when you first come along, they give you all these rules, you can't have this and can't have through a cup. What about sex? What's that say in the big book? And then, of course, it says, go to page 69. Someone got that wrong and they reversed the numbers and it said 96. So if there's any new or near new members, ladies and men, you'd be happy to go to 96, because this is what it says: do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You are sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. We find it a waste of time to keep chasing a man or a woman who cannot or will not work with you. Yeah, well, I was born on a dairy. I don't know how I got this job up here. You know, it says in the book we're actors. I'm an actor right now, pretending I'm nice and comfortable and cool. I'm profusely sweating. I can't feel my feet. Because the first time I ever spoke, where there's a lot of people in the room, you know, and I was so nervous. I wasn't nervous walking up. It was when I turned around and looked at you all. And I felt all those things come on me. And I said, my name's Alcoholic and I'm a John, you know. And then everybody laughed and I looked down to see if my fly was done up, you know, like that was ego, wasn't it? But anyway, I was born on a dairy farm, and my dad was killed when I was 10 in a truck accident. And up to that age, you know, I was a very happy young fella, you know. Played a lot of sport as a kid, and things changed, you know. I reckon the gene come alive in me. You know, my dad was killed when he was 38. There were 6 of us. Mum was 35, you know. My grandmother was 1 of 12, my mum was 1 of 10, so I'd say Dad was going for a dozen, but he was killed. Now, I don't know what happened, but my life changed then. You know, from a happy-go-lucky kid to felt different. Seemed to be resentful. I won't get into all the things that happened after my dad was killed, and we lived on the farm, and I kept these resentments in me up until the age of 26. I didn't know what a resentment was, but I liked, and they drank. My dad drank. Maybe his brother died an alcoholic, and his son died an alcoholic, and maybe my dad might have been an alcoholic. But you know, he was a farmer and a carpenter, and he happened to be killed going over a steep embankment in a cattle truck, you know, with dogs and horses, and that's how he died, you know. And I thought to myself at the time, you know, like on the farm they used to have card nights, you know, and they'd drink and play cards, not, you know, once a month, but say play for lottery tickets, and they'd play till milking time in the morning. And I used to look around, you know, and sneak a few drinks, and you know, I used to look at me, and I used to hear the adults say, you know, what's wrong with John? And I'm listening around the corner, and I used to say to myself, well, what is wrong with John? I didn't think there was anything wrong with John, but they must have noticed something in me. Well, my grandfather, my great-grandmum was Irish, my great-grandfather was Italian, you know, and they were Catholics. And I went to a Catholic school like all of us did. All my mum's kids went to boarding schools, and so did we. But I was the first to go in my family because my grandfather used to like wine. Maybe that was the eye tie in him, but he used to like it. And he used to have it behind his bathroom door. He had it in the car shed, he had it in the barn, and he had it down at the dairy. And they were half gallons. And we used to sneak it. And we used to ask him, what's all this stuff you're drinking, Pa? And he'd say, it's my medicine, boy. He used to call me boy. I don't know if he ever knew my name. But I had to let him know I was his grandson. But so we used to pinch this wine, and we used to drink a lot of it, and 3 boys, and we used to sneak down the creek because we'd get frightened if we got caught, and we'd top it up. We'd top it up, you know, and he wasn't silly, and he just said to us one day, he called us aside, you know, and he said, hey, boy, he said, I don't mind you having a swig of my wine, but he said, when you fill it up at the creek, just watch the tadpoles, you know. I didn't know he was drinking tadpoles. And so they sent me to boarding school. And I went to a little primary school and a little Catholic nun school. And Man, I was shy. I was a shy kid. I liked the girls, but I was shy. I was angry because I couldn't do what I wanted to do because I was shy. I was so bloody shy. I was self-centred. I had all these little problems as a kid, but I played the cool part. I don't know whether I had a bit of a talent in sport, or whether it was because I wanted people to notice me, because I played a lot of sport. But at the little primary school, you'd be sitting in your classroom and if you wanted to go to the toilet, you'd have to put your hands up, and the sister would say, I always thought, people say, what caused alcoholism? And I used to say, Sister Athanasius, With a name like that, I think she did. And she used to have to put your hand up, and she would say in front of the class, do you want a number 1 or a number 2? I say number 2. I beg your pardon, did you say you want a number 2? And all the kids would go, and that used to hurt me, I was so ashamed that I was going to do a number 2. So you get up to the desk, and she'd open the lid up, she'd get the toilet paper out, I think they were on a budget, and she'd give me a square, 1 square. And it wasn't the toilet paper you get today, it was like you used to get in the railways. They were slimy and slippery, And when you want a gravy number 2, it wasn't good because it just slipped right up your back, And then you got poo all over and you didn't know what to do, and you had your shorts and long socks on, and you couldn't go back to the classroom, so we're on the river bank with your pants down, and you go to the ferns, and you'd have to wipe your backside on all these ferns. And the little kids at night would report me to the sister. Sister, John's got ferns in his backside. That was the start. And that used to upset me a lot. And used to get 4 shillings a week. It was my money. My grandparents give me 4 shillings. They used to give it to the nuns. And every fortnight you're allowed to buy your lunch. You were told what to buy, but you go to the tuck shop because other day pupils used to go to the school, and you go down there and you get threepence left. What's that, about 2 cents? And you could buy some lollies. And I thought, I was a bender lolly-ollet because you couldn't get much, so I thought I'll save all my money. So I saved all my threepences all year. And also I was just so happy because I was going to go down and get a large brown paper bag of mixed lollies. And Sister said to me, Athanasius, she said, where did you get that money from? Did you thieve it? I said, no, Sister, I did not thieve it. I said, I saved it. And she said, well, you're certainly not buying lollies with that much money, and she made me buy a pair of rosary beads. I've never saved money since. She was also the nun, Sister Athanasius. She was allowed to give you penance like the priest. So when you went to confession, sometimes I got a lot of penance. I don't know what I'd done wrong, and I'd be in the church saying me penance, and sometimes it took a long time. This is before I had rosary beads. And you'd be counting on your fingers, 50 Hail Marys, 5 Our Fathers, 5 Glory Bees. And sometimes you get carried away, and next minute you're scoring a try in the corner, and you think, oh my God, where was I up to? And you'd have to start again. Because if you didn't say your penance, you go to hell. There's a mortal sin. And an Irish priest said to me, he said, because I missed Mass on Sunday, I said, there was a flood on, Father. We couldn't get across the creek. He said, did your mother milk? Did your mother milk the cows? I said, yeah, she milked. We got a milk. She said, well, if you can get across the creek to milk the cows, you could have got the Mass. He said, you know what happens to you, boy, when you don't go to Mass? So I was head down. No, Father. He said, you go to hell. He said, you know what hell is, my boy? was frightened already. I said, no, Father. He said, that is where you burn. He said, you burn for eternity because you've committed a mortal sin. I said, and he said, do you know what eternity is, my boy? I said, no, Father. He said, that is forever and ever and ever. I could feel the heat on me. I was so scared. Now, that mightn't affect a lot of people that went to Catholic schools. I got nothing against, I got no resentments at all these days whatsoever. My mum died recently at 93. There was 26 nuns at her funeral. You know, I'm sure she's in heaven. But I got rid of all that stuff. But at the time, that sort of stuff affected me. All my life and a lot of time in AA, I suffered with this fear. I didn't know what anxiety was, and I remember we had a call to the house for my mum once, and I was 14 or 15, home on holidays, and the doctor said, have you got a brown paper bag? And I thought, what do you want a brown paper bag for Mum? And I give it to him, and he blew into it, and he showed me, he was teaching me how to blow into a brown paper bag. And I said, what's that for, doctor? And he said, you suffer with anxiety. And I didn't even know what anxiety was. And he said, I feel you're panicking a bit. I carried that brown paper bag in my wallet for 10 years after I got sober, because I used to have panic attacks. Not all the time after I got sober, but I used to get so much fear. And other people in AA have said to me over time, they said, John, my life's been much the same as yours. But he said, I didn't go through what you went through. You know, and I said, well, that's because we ain't talking about you. We're talking about me. You know, and there's probably as many types of alcoholics in this room as what there are alcoholics. Now, that was what I went through, you know. And I got sent off I went to high school. I went down to an agricultural college and maybe to be a farmer, but that didn't work out. And I had a lot of problems in school. I was obviously the little Johnny, but I don't know why I was like that, you know. I don't think any normal kid thinks if I cut that leg off that desk there, the teacher would sit on it and fall over. Kids don't think like that, do they? But I did. And I done that, and he fell over, and then he hurt himself. But he never asked who done it. He just called me up. I used to get a lot of floggings and a lot of cane. And some kids used to say to me, you know, are you playing footy this afternoon, John? And I said, hang on. I was the only kid that carried a diary. I'd look up my diary and say, I got a flogging on at 5:30. You know, they used to book you in for floggings. You know, could you imagine waiting for that? And my football coach, who was also a Maris brother, used to pull me aside and say, John, he said, all you got to do is cry. And he'll say, you'll never make me cry. I never cried. I suppose I cried when I was a baby, but I don't ever remember crying until I got sober. I never cried because no one was going to make me cry, you know. And I remember that last time when I was in hospital, before I get to that, anyway, I left school. And I think it's because my mum was a widow, you know, the Maris brother said, you know, like, this boy's not meant to be at school. You know, he's not interested. And he got me a job. And I was going to be a shearer way out at Warren. And mum wouldn't let me go out there because we had a couple of shearers in the family. And of course, they were alcoholics. Or they become one. And mum got me a job in the country town. But still, so I'm in these boys' homes all the time, still frightened of girls. Used to get the girls, but too frightened to do anything. I tell you what, that's a bugger, isn't it, when it's like that? You know, it's... And other people did. My brother did. They were younger than me, you know, and I used to get resentful, but I never showed it. I used to make excuses up. So one day, some of me public mates, I call them, you know, they didn't go to boarding schools. They went to Protestant schools, Catholics and publics. So they set me up with a date. And we used to go to the country dances, you know, we used to buy a bottle of brown, well, my favourite was brown muscat. and we'd all buy a bottle of brown muscat, and they set me up with this date, and this girl, you know, she was a little bit older than me. Anyway, she taught me very quickly. You know, I was playing under 18s football at the time, and I wasn't even 16. And this girl come up to me a couple of months later, and she just whispered to me, she said, "It's your baby." I said, "What?" She said, "It's your baby." I said, "What?" She said, "I'm pregnant, and it's your baby, Ciccolini." That's my last name. And I said, "I don't think so." And I was frightened of her. I thought, my God, you know, I'm 16, I'm going to have a baby. Anyway, Flamin, I used to stay away from her in this little country town, but she used to come to the football where I was playing at Taree, Wingham, Gloucester, Port Macquarie, Wauchope. She was there, and she used to wait at the turnstile when I used to run in. She used to wait in there, and she used to say, "It's your baby." And then it started to get round to these other little country towns. And there wasn't too many in the grandstand under 18s, you know, and as soon as I'd run on, all the people in the grandstand say, "It's your baby, Ciccolini." Anyway, I joined the Navy. Done. Mum said, "What are you joining the Navy for, John? You haven't got a girl in trouble, have you?" I says, "Come on, Mum." So I joined the Navy, and in the first 3 years in the Navy, I spent 3 times in the military correctional establishment, which they haven't got right yet because they didn't fix me up. But I got out of the Navy. A lot of things happened in the Navy, you know. I drank a hell of a lot more, and I'm going to skip a fair bit till I got to my first hospital. And in between that, I was a blackout drinker. I woke up in hospital and I was 21, 22, with a policeman at my door. And I didn't know what happened. I didn't know where I'd been. I didn't know what hospital I was in. And I listened to the radio on the back of a wall above my bed every half hour of the night when the news was on to see if anything happened, to see what town I was in. And it come up that I was in an accident and I killed a chap. Another fellow was in hospital for 14 months and I had no idea. A court case went for well over 12 months and I got off that case with a 6-month suspended jail sentence. I lost my licence for life at the time and a good behaviour bond. So they tried to re-trial me, but for some reason they couldn't. And I later found out that magistrate, I was doing a 12-step job about 8 years later, and that magistrate was in the same hospital talking to another alcoholic. So maybe God looked after me at the time, you know, but so I finally got to hospital for the first time. I was working, went to Sydney because I'd done the geographical. I went to Sydney to work. And when I was down there, I tried to stop. And the first time I stopped was for 3 days and I went into the DTs. Now, I didn't know what the DTs were, but there was all sorts of things coming out of the walls in my house at the time. And I was with my girlfriend at the time and she said, I was screaming. She said, "John," she said, "you're having a nightmare." And I said, "It's not a nightmare." I said, "I'm awake." I said, "I'm frightened." And so I drank straight away. And it went. And it happened again when I was on one of the rattlers going to work, when I tried to stop once again. And I had these rats on me and I was screaming in the train because they were eating my stomach. They were inside my stomach. And someone, I don't know how I got to, but I ended up in hospital. I stayed there for 6 weeks. But when I got out, they asked me, the psychiatrist said that he gave me a letter and it had Ryde Hospital on it. It just had Ryde and a name on it. And he said, "Could you go there and report to this guy?" So I got in a taxi and I said to the chap, the taxi driver said, "Mate, could you take me to the right hospital?" And he said, "Well, which one do you want to go to?" And I said, "Well, how many is there?" He said, "Well, there's two." And I said, "And what are the two?" He said, "Well, there's the general and there's the psychiatric centre." And I said, "No, which one do you think I'll be going to?" And he said, "The general?" I said, "Well, of course it's the general." And I handed the letter over. They looked at it for a fair bit, and it was the wrong hospital. I'll tell you what, Ryde's not a nice place to go to. So I done me time, and then I got sick again, and I went to another hospital. And this is where I done my first, fourth and fifth step before doing 1, 2 and 3. Because the matron said to me, she said, she told me I was sick in the head. And I got upset about that because I thought I was okay. And a couple of my, two ladies that were in that same hospital that I fell in love with, as you do, they said, "John, none of us liked the matron, but you were in there for 6 days and they did save your life." And I think my response was, "Well, whack you do." And she said to me, "John," she said, "you may bounce back. You may bounce back physically, but," she said, "you're sick in the head." I'll never forget her saying that, and one day she said to me, she said, "Maybe you should go down and speak to Father John, and he'll look at those steps with you. Maybe you should do a fourth and fifth step." So I went down to the little chapel. And sure enough, there was this fella in there, and I said, "Father John?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "The matron sent me down, Father," I said, "to do some of these steps. Something about a fourth and fifth step." He said, "Well, what I can do," he said, "I can go through the 10 Commandments with you." I said, "Well, yeah, I knew a bit about that." And I said, "Yeah, that'll be fine, they'll do." And he said to me, he said, "Will you like the lead?" I couldn't think what the first one was. I said, "That's okay, Father, you can lead." So we went through the whole 10 Commandments. I broke them all, and when I finished, I was down there for a couple of hours. I just laid my life out to him. And when I got back, my friend said to me, "Where you been, John?" And I said, "I've been down doing these steps with Father John." They said, "Father John?" I said, "Yeah, Father John." I said, "There he is. He's just walked in the door." They said, "That's not Father John. He's one of the patients." So I done my first, fourth and fifth with a psycho. It's, so you're walking around like this all the time, No, it's a bit scary. But anyway, I got to AA. We'll start from there. And I went back to Taree to live because I had to follow my partner because that's where she went. She went back home. And I caught the train after I spent my time in hospital. And I caught the train home, and I thought she'd be down the station, meeting me. Because here's John, he's 6 weeks sober. And I got down and I thought, I was just so happy coming home on the train. And I thought she's going to be down the station like you see in the movies, running along the station. "John! John!" Anyway, she wasn't there. But, and I got cranky about that. And then the AA people come. Boy, oh boy. The car, we hear it all the time, the car pulls up, they don't come inside, they just blow the horn. Beep, 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 beep. And I used to get a bit resentful about that horn, I used to go out and the fella in the back would get out and he'd let me in the middle. And you know what it's like to get in the middle of the back when you're full of anxiety and tension and fear. And I've just felt like smashing me way. I reckon I could have smashed my way through the roof of the car. I was so frightened. And I looked at it and I was so judgmental. And I was just looking at these guys in this old green station wagon that I didn't think was going to make up the hill. And here's the fella driving, and we've probably heard this name before. It was Tom the Finn. He called himself Tom the Finn. And I couldn't even understand him. He was Finnish. You know, Tom's favourite joke was, "What about me, John? I'm finished before I started." And I'd say, "Yeah, good one, Tom." Well, Tom was there, you know. I couldn't understand him. He's talking to me. I'm in the middle of the back. I just let him go, let him talk and finish. And then there's another fella sitting in the middle called Skin. I thought, Skin? It's a funny name. All these people, I thought, I'm 26, they all looked 70, but I think they were only about 48 or 50. And I thought, I couldn't believe it. I thought to myself, how am I sitting in a car that's not going to make the hill with these sort of people? I'm in the wrong place. I'm not meant to be here. And Skin, who was in the middle at the front, I got hearing aids now, but Skin had a hearing aid. Back in those days, it was like a battery. Had this big, they walked like that. It was sitting in his pocket. People might remember him. He had jumping leads going to his ears, you know. And I just looked at him and I thought, you know, he's not well. And then there was Ernie. Ernie was sitting Ernie said he got sober in 1956 in Chatswood. Come up and started the meeting in Wingham in 1958. Well, as if I believe that. He had a 1914 suit on, striped, buttons done up crooked, collar turned in like that, and he's telling me he's 18 years sober. And I said, yeah, mate, okay. I had Aboriginal Roy sitting on my left. I didn't talk to Roy because he was still fighting in the tents at 38. So I wasn't going to talk to him because he's a bit scary. And then I had Wally. We all heard about Wally. Now, Wally was a about a year or two older than me, and he was the youngest person I knew. And Wally was sitting there, and he looked a bit cranky. He had other problems, I later found out. And I was just had my head down like you do. I wasn't looking up for anyone. And I'm looking down, they were all talking to me, and they were all talking to themselves. And I looked down again, I just noticed Wally, he had his pyjamas on underneath his jeans. About 6 inches, they were hanging out, his flannelettes. And he caught me looking at him. And he said, what are you looking at, mate? I said, nothing. Yeah. Frightened of Roy, frightened of Wally. Man, I couldn't speak English. Two other people lying. And here's this fella getting cranky on me. And I said, no, mate, I wasn't looking at anything. He said, yes, you were. I said, I was not. He said, you were, mate. He said, you're looking down there, so you got a problem? I said, no, I haven't got a problem at all. He said, I think you got a problem. I said, no, I haven't got any problems. Well, he said, you keep looking down there. He said, I think you got a hell of a problem. I said, okay. I said, I've just noticed you got your pyjamas on underneath your jeans. He said, you got a problem with that, mate? I said, I haven't got a problem at all. You know, and he said, well, you seem to. I said, no. I said, you want to wear your pyjamas underneath your clothes? I said, that's fine by me. I said, has everyone got their pyjamas on? He said, don't be smart. I said, I'm not being smart. I said, maybe everyone wears their pyjamas. He said, don't be smart. You know, by this time, you know, the sweat profusely running all down my back. I couldn't feel my feet. I couldn't feel my hands. I was suffering from physical symptoms all through my body, from emotional problems in here. And I was just praying. It was 55 miles to go to the meeting. You know, I didn't know the Serenity Prayer, but I kept saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, please help me, Jesus. Please help me. And we got up to War Hope, you know, and I was up there and I was praying that someone else would take me home. But there was no one. And on the way home, you know, he said to me, do you want to know why I wear my pyjamas under my jeans? I said, not at all. He said, well, you've got a hell of a problem about it and you think everybody else is wearing their pyjamas. What's your problem? I said, I haven't got a problem at all. He said, do you want to know why I wear my pyjamas? I said, if you want to tell me. He said, it's in case I feel tired on the way home. I said, okay. Please help me, Jesus. Please help me. Anyway, Wally and me become friends. I don't know how. and he started the lawn mowing business up. But he couldn't quote. And he kept asking me, could I help him? And at the end, I wanted to get paid. After about 12 months, I had my own job. And I kept helping him, and he had a little car. I didn't have a car. I don't know if he had a licence. I didn't have one. So he said, I'll give you a job. I want to get paid. And he said, well, okay. I said, I'll pay you for this next job. He loaded this trailer up. I thought I was going to mow a lawn. I had one of those great big lawn mowers. I had a rotary hoe, 2 chainsaws. And he said, could you go up and mow this lawn? I'll give you $40. And I thought, that's not too bad. It's probably a day's wage. Well, I went up there. The lawn was about 3 acres that had 16 gum trees on the riverbank. And I just didn't do it. And he got upset about that. So I kept friends with Wally, and we went to a few meetings in this little V-dub. Anyway, we're going down to the closest meeting was only 23 mile away, and that was Foster. And we're sitting in his Volkswagen, we're tearing down this little place just out of Taree, the 4 Mile Hill, they call it, you know. Volkswagen, tailwind behind us, we were doing about 56 kilometres an hour. And next minute he looked at me, and I was looking at him first because he had red desert boots on, red socks, red jeans, and a red shirt. And that wasn't the dress of the day back then. But I thought it was okay, he can wear what he likes. And then he looked at me and he screamed at me, I can't do it! I can't do it! I said, what, Wally, what is it that you can't do? He said, I can't help everybody. I can't help everybody. He said, you know I'm Jesus. I thought, please God help me. He said, and I said, yes. Now I'm getting into his story. I said, yes, I do know you're Jesus. And he said, do you? And I said, yes. And then we drove for a little while, then he went like that. He said, and who are you? I said, I'm your friend John. He said, John who? I said, John the Baptist. I didn't know what else to say. He said, will you help me? I said, I'll help you. He says, because I can't help everyone. We got to the Foster meeting and I was just praying that someone was there to take me home. But I had to come back with Wally. Yeah, it was very tiring times with Wally. You know, it's yeah, I don't know what else to say about that, but I was a wreck. You know, I couldn't focus. I was going to as many meetings as I could, but Wally was always there. And when I used to come home from work, Wally's sitting on my front porch step, you know, and I used to come inside, you know, and I used to, by this time, I got married, God help her, and she said, what's wrong? I said, what's he doing out on the step? He wants to see you. And I said, okay. And he used to come in and see me all the time, but Wally found out he was a paranoid schizophrenic. He suffered with that, you know, and that's just other problems we get, don't we, when we come to AA. But I just think back in those very early years, you know, I wasn't real well myself, you know, and I used to think to myself, I used to go to meetings. I'd never stop going to meetings. As sick as I was at times, I never stopped going, you know, and I just felt at times, you know, that God's going to help me, you know, and I think it was listening to people all the time that God had helped me. And I started to get very sick within myself, you know, and I suffered with a lot of anxiety. Doctor said I had depression. I didn't really know what depression was, but I never drank. And a friend of mine that was a doctor, and I was helping him. And and I used to go to his surgery after he finished work on my way home from work and just have a yarn to him. And he said to me one day, he said, John, he said, I'd like you to speak to someone. You know, and I thought, who am I going to speak to? And he said, he's on the phone. Now, we were talking for 10 minutes and his phone was just lying down there. And he said, he's on the phone. And I picked up the phone and I said, hello. And he says, good evening, John. He said, this is Dr. George Wilson. He said, I believe you were coming down to see me. And he was at Cogra. And he had a little psychiatric place down there. And I tell you what, that pride, you know, when you got a few years up, and before that, I was a delegate. I was a delegate for Area C, and I'd done my time as an area delegate, and I got very sick after that. And I went down to see George, and he said to me, you know, he said, I'm glad you're coming down, John. And I went down there, and I'll tell you what, the fear in my life, I suffered with physical symptoms caused from emotional stress. Now, I didn't know any of that, and I used to keep working with this fear. I couldn't feel my feet. I couldn't feel anything from my waist down. And yet I was still going to AA on a regular basis. I wouldn't own up to what was wrong with me, because the pride, being an area delegate, went through that, doing all the stuff that you do, starting up different districts, and yet I had this problem. But I had to admit it. And I went down to the doctor, and I went down that hospital, and I was so frightened from fear. Now, I never knew fear could affect you like this, you know, way past anxiety. And I used to, in the hospital, Wandine, if anyone knew it, in Cogra, and I used to sit next to the nurses' station. I wasn't even game to go to my room because I had that much fear in me, you know. And one day the doctor said to me, he said, he couldn't work out what was wrong with me because I had all this fear. I couldn't feel my legs from emotional stress. I couldn't talk to him about it. And he just said to me one day, he said, that's right, it started off in the hospital. I had some dessert, and I thought there was alcohol in the dessert. Now, I was so fussy with alcohol that probably well overboard, where I used to check every lolly, every dessert, every piece of food for when I got sober, because I was petrified of getting on the drink again. I was frightened of the horrors. I was frightened of a lot of stuff. And I felt that I ate something that had rum in it. And I said to Dr. George Wilson, I said, George, why are you putting alcohol in the food where you got alcoholics and drug addicts in your hospital? Now, George died 56 years sober, a beautiful man, as some of you probably knew him. And he said to me, John, he said, we got no alcohol in this hospital whatsoever. And I said, I tasted alcohol in those desserts I had. And I said, I know it was alcohol and it was rum. And I know rum, you know. And he got up me and he said, why do you think there's rum? And I went on about it so much. What did he? And he said to me, he said, why would you think that I would put alcohol in this hospital when I look after you as an AA member? The matron of the hospital is a Wandine at Cogra, who is an AA member. Do you think that we'd put alcohol in any of the foods, John? You know? And while I was angry, and arguing like you would not believe. All that feeling I had in my legs went. Completely went. I could feel my feet, I could feel my legs, I could feel everything. And then for about 10 minutes, it all come back again. And from that day, I was probably about 9 years sober, might have been 10, that gave me the first little glimpse that, John, you're sick. You're sick. You might be sober, but you're sick. You put everything into service, because my sponsor was Tom the Finn. Now, Tom went right through as a serviceman, and I've been a world service delegate, and that was enough to get me out of hospital and to think that's how much stress can affect you without even picking up a drink. I was sick in sobriety, and that was enough to get me through to believe. And even today, if I still get a little bit stressed out, and over my working life, I've got stressed, different jobs I've had. One main job is to travel around the state doing it, and I used to get extremely stressed, and I'd get some of those feelings back. And Bede from Randwick said to me, many years ago, Bede used to talk about anxiety a lot. And he was a bit of a guest speaker around the joint. And I pulled him up one day and I said, Bede, how did you get rid of this stress you talk about? And I remember he just looking at me and he said, hey, John, you've never ever heard me say that I got rid of it completely. But he said, what I can say to you, that the little bit that I have left at times, what was his words? He used to say, it is distressing, John, but it's not dangerous. You just hand your will and your life over to God and you pray. Now, even today, at 51 years sober in June, that sometimes if I get stressed out, in my work life, I used to get stressed out big time. And I would get some of those physical symptoms from emotional stress come back into my life. And I'm able to say, without going into fear or panic attacks or anything like that, I just ask God, I know that I'm going overboard here, God. Please help me. These aren't just physical symptoms from emotional stress, and I've been so happy since those days, I haven't bored you all, but I tell you what, I love AA. I love it with a passion. I always have, and I haven't been always well in the fellowship, but I've never stopped going. Never stopped going from this AA fellowship whatsoever. I've met some absolute beautiful people, and by the way, those people in the car, I am alive, the rest of them have gone, 3 of them are in heaven, died sober. The other 2 picked up a drink and died. So I get goosebumps today standing here thinking, how fortunate am I to have those beautiful people in that car when I first went to my first AA meeting. I am so grateful. So grateful. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, John. It was great to hear you. Thank you to all our speakers for the meeting. It's been a wonderful meeting for me. Am I supposed to read this bit? I'll hand it back to Darren.
Let's all close the meeting with the Serenity Prayer and then stick around because there might be a happy birthday. Jody, do you want to take us out with the Serenity Prayer?
To a God of your own understanding, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
And let's all sing Tim, happy birthday for 25 years sober today. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Timothy. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your night. We'll be back here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock a.m.